Most people walk past one Wall Street and see a limestone tower, beautiful and old, one of dozens in Lower Manhattan. But buried 72 feet beneath the sidewalk sits a vault that once held $8 billion, sealed behind doors laced with chemicals designed to paralyze anyone who tried to cut through them. The vault weighed 5,000 tons. It was the third largest in the world, and the building above it, all 50 stories of Indiana limestone and 3 million hand-set glass tiles, opened its doors in 1931, the same year 2,294 American banks collapsed and took everything their depositors had. This is the story of a building that was designed to lie, and the lie was beautiful. Chapter 1: The most expensive dirt in America. In 1905, a group of businessmen from St. Louis paid $700,000 for a piece of Manhattan the size of a living room. That was not unusual, not on this corner. The intersection of Wall Street and Broadway had been the gravitational center of American money since before there was a nation to print it. Dutch traders had bargained here when Manhattan was still called New Amsterdam. George Washington had been inaugurated a few hundred yards north. And by the first decade of the 20th century, the value of the dirt beneath your shoes at this particular crossing was climbing so fast that the numbers stopped making sense to anyone who did not trade in them daily. The plot those St. Louis businessmen purchased was a sliver, a remnant, the kind of leftover parcel that in any other city would have been a parking lot or a service alley. Here, it cost more per square foot than farmland cost per acre in most of the country. The land at Wall and Broadway did not care what you built on it. It only cared that you could afford to stand there. Before One Wall Street existed, other buildings had tried to hold this ground. The Manhattan Life Insurance Building had stood on this site, and for a brief moment in the 1890s, it was the tallest building in the world, 50 stories of ambition piled up on a plot barely big enough for a garden. That title lasted about as long as titles always last in New York, a few years. Then something taller went up somewhere else, and the Manhattan Life Building became just another tower that used to matter. It was demolished to make room for what came next. That is the pattern of this corner. Build, surpass, demolish, repeat. The corner does not remember what stood here before. It only knows what stands here now. Think about what that pattern means. Every generation of builders at Wall and Broadway looked at the previous generation's monument and said, "Not good enough. Tear it down. We will build something that lasts." And every generation was wrong, and the next generation proved it by doing exactly the same thing. The corner consumes its own history. It is an address that eats its children. By the late 1920s, the Irving Trust Company had decided it was tired of renting. The bank had been headquartered in the Woolworth Building since 1913, occupying space in someone else's Cathedral of Commerce. They were tenants. Lewis Pearson, the chairman of Irving Trust, wanted something different. He wanted something that belonged to the bank alone, something permanent, something that said, in limestone and steel, that this institution would be here long after everyone reading this sentence is gone. Irving Trust was not a small bank dreaming above its station. By 1929, it was the fifth largest financial institution in the United States. It held correspondent accounts with banks across Europe, Asia, and South America. Its executives like to say that the sun never set on the Irving, and for a while, that boast had the force of fact behind it. This was an institution that believed it deserved the most expensive ground on earth. And for a brief, dazzling, catastrophic moment, nobody told them otherwise. In 1928, an Irving Trust began assembling the parcels that would form the building's footprint. The final acquisition cost $14.5 million. That figure included not just the land, but 4 existing buildings that had to be purchased and destroyed. Among them was a narrow tower that New Yorkers had nicknamed the Chimney Building for its absurd proportions. It was 18 stories tall and barely wide enough for a hallway, a strange, skinny thing rising from a postage stamp lot, like a finger pointing at the sky. They tore it down without ceremony. Its proportions, driven by the insane land values of this corner, were in some ways a preview of the super-tall towers that would come to Manhattan nearly a century later. But in 1928, the Chimney Building was simply an obstacle, and obstacles at this address do not last long. What Pearson wanted in its place was not simply large, it was total. He wanted a building that occupied the entire block from Wall Street to Exchange Place, from Broadway to New Street. A building that announced from every angle that the money was here and was not going anywhere. The architects would be given almost no budget restrictions. The materials would come from quarries in Indiana and marble yards in the Pyrenees. The mosaics would be fabricated in Berlin and assembled by Italian craftsmen. Nothing would be local. Nothing would be cheap. Nothing would suggest, even for a moment, that the Irving Trust Company had economized. But the ground has its own memory, and the ground at Wall and Broadway has watched banks rise and banks fall and banks rise again on the bones of the ones that fell. The Irving Trust Company would learn what every tenant of this corner eventually learns. The dirt endures. The names on the door do not. Chapter 2. The architect who dressed as his own building. Ralph Walker left MIT before graduating, apprenticed for $1 a week, and Frank Lloyd Wright called him the only other honest architect in America. That is a remarkable sentence for a man most people have never heard of. Walker was born on November 28, 1889 in Waterbury, Connecticut, the son of a construction worker. His family was working class. His father laid foundations and framed walls for other men's buildings. Nobody in his household had ever designed anything taller than a fence. But Ralph Walker had a gift that would take him decades to fully understand, and that would ultimately consume him entirely. He could make enormous things feel intimate. He could take a 50-story tower and make the person standing at its base feel not small, but welcomed. Not intimidated, but invited. He grew up in Connecticut and Rhode Island, attended classical high school in Providence, and enrolled at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology to study architecture. He could not afford to finish. At 18, while still attending classes at MIT, he apprenticed in Providence with architect Howard K. Hilton. The 3-year apprenticeship paid $1 a week his first year, $2 his second year, $3 his third. By the time he had moved up to a design position, paying $9 a week, he had learned something that no classroom could have taught him. He had learned that architecture is not about buildings. It is about the people inside them. Walker left MIT during his final semester before graduating. He married Stella Forbes of Providence in 1913. He practiced in offices in Boston, Montreal, and New York, working on churches, universities, and commercial buildings. During the First World War, he served as a second lieutenant in the camouflage section of the Army Corps of Engineers, where his job was to make things appear to be something they were not. It is impossible not to see in that wartime assignment a rehearsal for everything he would later do at 1 Wall Street. In 1919, Walker joined the New York firm of Mackenzie, Voorhees, and Gmelin, and he would remain associated with that firm and its successors for the rest of his career. His early work was competent but conventional, Beaux-Arts designs that supported the firm's ongoing projects. Then came the commission that changed everything. Walker believed that architecture was psychology. He said it directly and without apology. "The architect of the future," he wrote, "will have to be a psychologist, because it is as important to design a building for man to be mentally comfortable in as it is for him to be physically comfortable." This was not how most architects of the 1920s talked. They talked about form and proportion. They talked about structure and materials. They debated styles, classical versus modern, ornament versus simplicity. Walker talked about feelings. He talked about what happens inside a person when they walk through a door. His breakthrough came with the Barclay Vesey Building, a telephone company headquarters completed in 1926. It was the first skyscraper to use the 1916 zoning resolution as a design asset rather than a constraint. Where other architects saw setback requirements as limitations, Walker saw them as opportunities to create rhythm. The building stepped back as it rose, like a staircase climbing toward the sky, and the setbacks were not grudging concessions to the law, but dramatic gestures that gave the tower a sculptural quality no box-shaped building could match. Critics called it the first true Art Deco skyscraper in America. Walker became famous overnight. Irving Trust came calling. They had assembled their impossibly expensive land at Wall and Broadway. They needed an architect who could translate $14.5 million of real estate into something that justified the cost. 35 candidates were considered. Walker was chosen, and he threw himself into the project with an intensity that blurred the boundary between creator and creation. He would later attend a costume ball dressed as his own building, wearing a suit tailored to echo the fluted limestone of One Wall Street, its fabric shaped to mimic the rippling facade he had designed. That is either the act of a man who loved his work too deeply, or a man who could no longer tell where the work ended and he began. Perhaps it was both. Walker formed what he called the One Wall Street Unit. It's a dedicated team that met weekly to shape every detail of the tower. Nothing was left to improvisation. Not the width of the corridors, not the depth of the window reveals, not the angle at which afternoon light would enter the banking hall, not the color of the lobby floor. Walker understood something that Pearson and the Irving Trust Board may not have fully grasped. They were not building an office building. They were building a theater. The audience would be the wealthy depositors who walked through the front door. And the show would be the building itself, performing the role of permanence in a world that was about to discover just how impermanent everything could be. The design that emerged was unlike anything on Wall Street. Where other bank towers were boxy and classical, and dressed in columns and pediments borrowed from ancient Rome, Walker's building rippled. The limestone facade was carved into gently concave flutes that ran from sidewalk to crown, giving the tower the appearance of fabric draped over stone, as if the building were wearing its own walls like a curtain. One critic described it as a natural precipice shaped by erosion. Another called it feminine. Another called it theatrical. All of them were right. It was 50 stories tall and 654 feet high, and it looked like it had grown from the ground rather than been placed upon it. Chapter 3. A cornerstone laid on borrowed time. Excavations began in July 1929. The stock market crashed 3 months later. Construction never stopped. Consider that sentence carefully. Hold it in your mind. In October of 1929, the Dow Jones Industrial Average lost nearly half its value in a matter of weeks. Fortunes that had taken lifetimes to build vanished between breakfast and lunch. Men who had been millionaires on Monday were bankrupt by Friday. Banks that had lent money against inflated stock prices found themselves holding worthless paper. And at the corner of Wall and Broadway, a few hundred yards from the floor of the New York Stock Exchange, where the screaming was loudest, workers kept digging. They did not stop. The order never came. Irving Trust had committed to the project, and Lewis Pearson was not the kind of chairman who reversed course because the market had panicked. The excavations continued through the winter of 1929 and into the new year, the workers descending deeper into the bedrock, while the economy descended into something that had no precedent in American history. The excavations alone were a feat of engineering violence. The foundations of the buildings that had previously stood on this site had walls 8 feet thick. To remove them, crews had to blast and chisel through stone and concrete that had been designed to stand forever, making room for a new building designed to stand even longer. The paradox was lost on no one who thought about it. You had to destroy one version of permanence to build the next. This is the fundamental act of faith on which all construction at Wall and Broadway depends. The belief that your version of forever will be the one that actually lasts. By January of 1930, the hole was deep enough. The cornerstone ceremony took place on a cold winter day, while banks were failing by the hundreds across the country. Lewis Pearson stood at the site and spoke about the future with the confidence of a man who either could not see the catastrophe unfolding around him, or who had decided that the only rational response to catastrophe was to build something bigger and more permanent than the catastrophe itself. Perhaps he was right. The catastrophe did not last forever. The building is still standing. Harry Ward, the general contractor, had written personal letters of apology to 500 neighbors, explaining the noise and disruption that construction would cause. This small detail is worth pausing on. In the middle of the worst economic collapse in American history, while millions of Americans were losing their jobs, their homes, and their savings, a building contractor was sending handwritten notes apologizing for the inconvenience of construction noise. The distance between Ward's letters and the breadlines forming 10 blocks north was measured not in miles but in worlds. They existed in the same city at the same moment and had nothing to say to each other. The numbers tell the scale of what was rising. 400 boxcar loads of Indiana limestone were quarried from the earth, cut to specification, and shipped by rail to Manhattan. Individual blocks weighed as much as 30 tons. Each one had to be lifted by crane, swung into position, and set against the steel frame with tolerances measured in fractions of an inch. More than 30 elevators were installed, some near the building's exterior walls for tenants, and some reserved exclusively for Irving Trust executives who would access the building from Wall Street through a private entrance. 6 private elevators for the bankers, a separate entrance, a separate experience. Even the vertical circulation of the building was designed to keep the wealthy apart from everyone else. The steel frame rose at a pace that seemed to mock the economy collapsing around it. Floor after floor, column after column, the skeleton of the building climbed above Lower Manhattan, while below it the financial system was shaking itself apart. 50 stories, 654 feet. The building employed approximately 4,000 construction workers during its peak months, 4,000 men who had jobs because a bank had decided to build a monument to itself, while 4 million other Americans searched for work of any kind. By the time the building topped out, the depression had deepened beyond anyone's worst predictions. The unemployment rate was climbing toward 25%. In 1930 alone, 1,352 banks failed across the United States. In 1931, the year one Wall Street opened its doors, another 2,294 would follow. Nearly $1.7 billion in deposits evaporated from the banking system. People who had saved their entire lives woke up one morning to discover that their savings no longer existed. The banks had closed. The money was gone. There was nothing to do and nowhere to go. And there it stood, 50 stories of Indiana limestone, fluted and rippling in the light, its crown catching the morning sun above a city that was breaking apart below. The building was 90% occupied on opening day. The Broadway Association endorsed it as a civic achievement. Bear Stearns took offices on the 10th floor. Fiduciary Trust Company moved into the 30th. One Wall Street opened on schedule, on budget, and in complete defiance of every signal the world was sending. It stood at the corner of Wall and Broadway and insisted that everything was fine, that the system was working, that the money was still here, that the walls were too thick, the vault too deep, the mosaics too beautiful for anything to truly go wrong. But the building had a secret, and the secret was hidden in a room on the ground floor that ordinary people would never be allowed to enter. Chapter 4. 3 million tiles to hide the panic. The Red Room was never meant for ordinary people, and that was exactly the point. Walk through the entrance at 1 Wall Street in 1931, and you would have found yourself in a space that made cathedrals look restrained. The reception hall rose 33 feet from floor to ceiling, a triple-height volume that swallowed sound and demanded silence. Every surface, every wall, every column, every inch of the soaring ceiling was covered in glass mosaic tiles. Not painted, not papered, not gilded in the conventional way. Tiled. 3,200,000 of them, each one no larger than a thumbnail. Each one placed by hand by Italian craftsmen who worked tile by tile, row by row, for months. At floor level, the tiles were the color of oxblood, deep, dark, saturated, the red of old wine and dried roses and the interior of a clenched fist. As the eye traveled upward, the color shifted. Red softened into oranges. Oranges warmed into ambers. And at the ceiling, the tiles turned to gold, gold leaf pressed into glass, catching whatever light entered the room and throwing it back in a shimmer that made the entire space seem to breathe. Geometric patterns, Art Deco webs, and radiating lines were traced in gold leaf tiles that glittered against the red background like the veins in a living stone. The effect was overwhelming. It was meant to be overwhelming. The walls surrounding the mosaics were Pyrenees black marble, quarried in the mountains between France and Spain and shipped across the Atlantic to frame Meyer's work. The columns were Verona red marble, imported from Italy. The floor was polished stone. The ceiling soared 33 feet overhead. The total area of mosaic work covered 7,791 square feet, an expanse of hand-placed glass that represented one of the largest mosaic installations in the Western Hemisphere. This was not a lobby. It was not a waiting room. It was a persuasion chamber. The woman who designed it was Hildreth Meyer, and her name should be as famous as the room she created. Meyer was born on September 3rd, 1892, in Flushing, Queens. Her mother was a painter who had aspired to a career in the arts and who channeled that aspiration through her daughter. In 1911, now the year Maier turned 19, her mother took her to Italy, and the experience shattered everything she thought she knew about what walls could be. She saw the mosaics of Ravenna, where Byzantine craftsmen had covered entire churches in gold and blue tesserae 1,000 years before her birth. She saw the frescoes of Florence. She saw walls that told stories, walls that glowed, walls that turned light into meaning. She came home and decided she would spend her life decorating the walls of buildings. This was not a career path that welcomed women. In the 1920s, the worlds of architecture and architectural decoration were dominated by men. Male architects, male clients, male committees who approved commissions and signed checks. Maier worked her way into this world through talent so evident that it could not be argued with. She studied at the Art Students League in New York, at the California School of Fine Arts in San Francisco, and traveled twice to Paris, including in 1925 for the landmark exposition that gave Art Deco its name. By her mid-30s, she had decorated the Great Hall of the National Academy of Sciences, the Nebraska State Capitol, and the apse of St. Bartholomew's Church on Park Avenue. She had won the gold medal for mural decoration from the Architectural League of New York. She was, by any measure, one of the foremost architectural artists in America, and yet she worked in a profession that barely acknowledged her existence. When Walker needed someone to make the Red Room feel like a temple, he chose Maier. It was the first of many collaborations between them, a partnership of architect and artist that would produce some of the most important interior spaces in mid-century New York. The tiles were fabricated in Berlin by Poole and Wagner, a firm that had been making glass mosaic for churches and palaces across Europe for decades. Their craftsmen heated glass into thin sheets, pressed gold leaf between layers, cut the sheets into tiny squares called tesserae, and stamped each one with a small identification number so it could be placed in exactly the right position on the wall. Thousands of numbered tiles were packed into crates and shipped across the Atlantic to New York, where they were received by the Ravenna Mosaic Company, Italian craftsmen working from Maier's full-scale drawings that showed every tile in its intended location. The Ravenna craftsmen applied the tiles to the walls of the Red Room using a method that had not fundamentally changed since the Byzantine Empire. Wet plaster, small pieces of glass, steady hands. The work took months. Each wall was built up slowly, the colors blending as the artisans moved from floor to ceiling, from ox blood to gold, from the heavy darkness at the base to the shimmering light at the top. The effect when finished was not merely beautiful, it was hypnotic. The room seemed to pulse with warmth. Standing inside, it felt like standing inside a jewel. The Red Room was not open to the public. It was not a space where ordinary depositors stood in line to cash checks or make withdrawals. It was a private reception room for Irving Trust's wealthiest clients, the people who controlled the largest accounts, the people who needed to be reassured. And after October of 1929, reassurance was the most valuable commodity the bank had left to sell. The New York City Landmarks Preservation Commission would later describe what happened in language that stripped away all pretense. After the 1929 collapse of the financial markets, it became critically important for Irving Trust to project an image of permanence and intact wealth. Read that sentence again. The Red Room was not decorated for beauty's sake. It was not a gift to the city. It was not an expression of artistic ambition divorced from commercial purpose. It was decorated because the bank was terrified that its wealthiest clients would pull their money and run. And so, the Irving Trust Company covered 7,791 square feet of wall in 3 million handset glass tiles and hoped that wealthy clients would sit surrounded by oxblood and gold and feel that their fortunes were secure. This is the architecture of denial. The more desperate the moment, the more beautiful the lie. Every tile in the Red Room was a small, glittering promise that everything was going to be fine. The red said warmth. The gold said wealth. The height said permanence. And for the people who sat in that room, bathed in the glow of Maire's masterpiece, the promise might have felt true for an hour or an afternoon. But outside, the breadlines were growing longer. The banks were still failing. And the vault beneath their feet was being filled with money that would soon need armed guards and chemical weapons to protect it. What does it mean when beauty is built not from joy, but from desperation? It means the beauty is real. The desperation is also real. And the distance between them is the width of a mosaic tile. Chapter 5. The vault that could paralyze you. 72 feet below the street, behind doors 30 inches thick and laced with poison, sat the third largest vault in the world. Imagine descending. Down past the lobby with its marble floors and the ceiling where Maire painted the pursuit of wealth. Down past the mechanical rooms where the building's lungs and heart hummed behind concrete walls. Down through layers of foundation and bedrock, then through rock and clay and the buried memory of streams that once ran here before Manhattan, paved them over and forgot their names. 72 feet below the surface of Wall Street, deeper than a 6-story building is tall, you reach the vault. 5,000 tons of iron, steel, and concrete. That is the weight. 5,000 tons. A fully loaded freight train weighs roughly 3,000 tons. The vault beneath One Wall Street weighed nearly twice that. It was not a room. It was a bunker, a fortress buried inside a fortress, designed to resist every method of intrusion that the engineers of 1930 could imagine, and several they probably could not. 3 stories of storage space were stacked vertically beneath the earth, each one containing 2,700 square feet of floor space. The vault stretched from Broadway to New Street, occupying the full width of the block at its deepest level. The top story was for customers, the wealthy account holders who descended by private elevator to access their safe deposit boxes, their securities, their physical proof that they still possessed something of value. Families stored jewelry. Corporations stored contracts. Individuals stored the paper certificates that represented shares in companies that might or might not exist by the time they came back to check. The lower 2 levels stored Irving Trust's own reserves, cash, gold certificates, bearer bonds, the paper and metal that represented more money than most small nations possessed. The walls on 3 sides were 6 feet thick, not 6 inches, not 6 feet of drywall and insulation and empty space. 6 feet of solid iron, in steel and concrete, poured in layers and reinforced with metal bars, cured and hardened into a barrier that was designed to resist not just thieves, but time itself. You could fire a cannon at these walls and leave a mark, but not a hole. The 4th wall was slightly thinner, 3 feet of concrete backed by a thick layer of metal, but still far beyond anything a human being could penetrate with hand tools or small explosives. And then there were the doors, 30 inches of steel, set into frames that weighed more than a loaded truck. The doors were laced with a chemical defense system that remains, even by modern standards, startling. If anyone attempted to cut through them with a welding torch or an acetylene cutter, The heat would activate chemical compounds embedded in the door's structure. The chemicals would release fumes designed not to kill, but to paralyze. You would not be knocked unconscious gently and wake up with a headache. You would lose the ability to move your limbs. You would collapse to the floor of the vault, fully conscious, but unable to stand, unable to crawl, unable to do anything except lie there and wait for the guards to find you. The vault was designed to punish ambition. There was also a water tank built into the vault's defenses. If someone attempted to tunnel in from below, bypassing the doors entirely, the tank would detect the breach and flood the tunnel. You could not go through the doors. You could not go around them. You could not go under them. The vault was a sealed chamber defended by steel, concrete, chemistry, and hydrology, and it was located 72 feet below a city where millions of people had lost everything. When the vault's contents needed to move, they moved under armed escort. 200 guards carrying machine guns accompanied the transfers through the streets of Lower Manhattan. Picture that procession. New York City, 1931. Men in suits and overcoats carrying weapons designed for the trenches of France, surrounding armored vehicles loaded with certificates and cash, passing through neighborhoods where families were being evicted from apartments they could no longer afford. The guards walked past soup kitchens. They walked past men selling apples on corners for a nickel. They walked past the physical evidence of the American economy's collapse and delivered $8 billion to a vault 72 feet below the street. A vault that could paralyze anyone who got too close. The numbers from 1931 are difficult to hold in your mind at the same time. One Wall Street opened that year. So did 2,294 bank failures. 28,000 businesses closed permanently across the country. Nearly $1.7 billion in deposits vanished from the banking system. The money supply in the United States fell by nearly 30% between 1929 and 1933. Unemployment reached 25%. 1 out of every 4 workers in the richest country on earth had no job, no income, no way to feed their families. And beneath One Wall Street, the vault sat full, guarded, poisoned, impenetrable. It was the answer to a question that the Irving Trust Company did not want anyone to ask aloud. The question was simple. What if the money is not safe anywhere? The vault answered by being deeper, thicker, heavier, more heavily armed, and more chemically defended than anything anyone could imagine. It answered with 5,000 tons of certainty. But certainty was exactly what the Depression was in the business of destroying. You could build a vault 6 feet thick. You could lace its doors with paralyzing agents. You could station 200 men with machine guns at the entrance. And none of it mattered if the depositors stopped believing. Because money, in the end, is not metal and paper. Money is belief. And in 1931, belief was the scarcest resource in America. The vault endured. The belief did not. And the building above went on performing its role, its limestone facade catching the light, its red room glowing, its lobby ceiling depicting the pursuit of wealth, all of it pretending that permanence and 5,000 tons of iron were the same thing. Chapter 6. The Pursuit of Wealth, painted on the ceiling. Hildreth Myra titled her lobby mosaic The Pursuit of Wealth and saw nothing ironic about it whatsoever. The ceiling program in the main lobby was a separate commission from the Red Room, though both came from the same remarkable mind. Where the Red Room was a chamber of pure color and geometric pattern, designed to overwhelm the senses and suspend disbelief. The lobby ceiling told a story. Maier designed mosaic panels depicting allegorical figures in motion, reaching, grasping, building, trading, striving. The subject was wealth itself, not the possession of it, not the enjoyment of it, the pursuit, the chase, the relentless forward motion of human ambition towards something that can never quite be held. Maier defended the choice with the directness of someone who had spent 2 decades navigating rooms full of men who expected her to be modest and decorative and grateful for the work. The subject, she said, was entirely appropriate for a bank. What else should a financial institution celebrate on its ceiling? Agriculture? The seasons? The myths of ancient Greece? No, a bank exists for the pursuit of wealth. Honesty about that purpose was, in Maier's view, more dignified than pretending otherwise. If you are going to build a monument to money, have the courage to say so. She was right, and she was also, without knowing it, composing an epitaph for an era. The honesty was admirable, but the timing was catastrophic. While Maier's artisans pressed gold and colored tesserae into wet plaster above the lobby, carefully assembling figures that celebrated the acquisition of wealth, the nation outside was discovering what happened when the pursuit of wealth consumed everything in its path. Farms foreclosed, factories shuttered, children went hungry in the streets of the wealthiest cities on earth. The pursuit of wealth was not an abstraction painted on a ceiling. It was the force that had inflated the bubble, and the bubble had broken the country. One Wall Street in those early years of operation existed in a strange zone between triumph and disaster. On opening day, the building was 90% occupied. The Broadway Association praised it as a civic achievement, a contribution to the beauty and order of Lower Manhattan. Bear Stearns maintained offices on the 10th floor. Fiduciary Trust Company operated from the 30th. Tenants filled the corridors, the elevators, the private dining rooms. The building hummed with the business of money, even as money was failing everywhere else. The Irving Trust Company itself was doing something remarkable during the Depression years. It was surviving. While 5,000 banks collapsed between 1930 and 1933, dragging the savings of millions of Americans into oblivion, Irving Trust held. Lewis Pearson and his board had been conservative in their lending practices. They had not chased speculative returns during the boom years. They had not extended credit to borrowers who could not repay. When the crash came, they shifted $10 million into reserves, a massive financial cushion that allowed the bank to absorb losses that would have destroyed a less cautious institution. They maintained profits through the worst years of the Depression. Irving Trust was careful, and careful kept them alive. But the world was changing around them faster than any amount of caution could account for. Franklin Delano Roosevelt took office in March of 1933 with a mandate from the American people to remake the financial system that had failed them so completely. The reforms came in a wave. The Emergency Banking Act gave the government authority to inspect and close insolvent banks. The Glass-Steagall Act separated commercial banking from investment banking, drawing a wall between the institution that held your savings and the institution that gambled in the stock market. The creation of the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation guaranteed individual bank deposits up to a specified amount, which meant that ordinary Americans no longer needed to trust the strength of a bank's vault or the beauty of its lobby to believe their money was safe. The government promised to protect them, and if the government promised, you no longer needed 3 million tiles of oxblood and gold to feel secure. Then came the Securities and Exchange Commission, established to regulate the stock markets and prevent the kind of uncontrolled speculation that had led to the crash. Each of these reforms was necessary. Each was a direct response to the catastrophe that one Wall Street had been built to deny. And each one chipped away at the world the building celebrated. The era of unchecked banking power, of financial institutions so large and so confident and so unaccountable that they built 50-story monuments to themselves at the most expensive intersection in the world, was over. The rules were being rewritten. The government was stepping in, and the building, barely 2 years old, was already a relic of a world that no longer existed. Maire's pursuit of wealth continued to glitter above the lobby. The red room continued to glow. The vault continued to sit in its 72-foot darkness, chemically armed and structurally perfect. But the story was already turning. The building had won its first battle against obsolescence. It had survived the Depression. What it could not survive was something quieter, slower, and far more destructive than any financial crisis: irrelevance. Chapter 7. The Name That Disappeared. For 70 years, mergers had made the Irving Trust Company larger. In 1988, a merger erased it completely. The post-war decades were kind to Irving Trust, at least on paper. The bank grew steadily through the 40s and 50s, absorbing smaller institutions, extending its reach into new markets, building a global network of correspondent relationships that spanned continents. By 1960, its assets had swelled to $1,887 million. It operated 13 branches across New York City. Its correspondent banking network connected it to financial institutions in dozens of countries. The sun never set on the Irving, and for a while, and that boast had the weight of balance sheets behind it. The building itself aged well. The Indiana limestone facade weathered to a warmer, deeper tone. The fluted walls caught the light differently as the decades passed, shadows pooling in the concave channels as neighboring buildings rose and changed the angles of sun and reflection. The Red Room continued to serve its original purpose, receiving the bank's most important clients in a space that still radiated confidence, still shimmered with Maire's oxblood and gold, still performed its assigned role of persuasion. The vault beneath the street remained operational, its chemical defenses intact, its 6-foot walls unchanged from the day they were sealed. In 1961, Irving Trust expanded. The bank bought 3 adjacent buildings and commissioned an annex, designed by the successor firm to Walker's own practice, now called Voorhees, Walker, Smith, Smith, and Haynes. The annex was 28 stories of glass, steel, and concrete, a modern extension finished by late 1965 that made no attempt to echo the Art Deco poetry of the original tower. It was functional, it was efficient, it was everything the original building was not. The two structures stood side by side like a father and son who had grown up in different centuries and had nothing in common except an address. But the financial world was transforming faster than any building could adapt. The deregulation wave of the 1980s unlocked forces that would have been unrecognizable to Louis Pearson. Banks were no longer content to be banks. They wanted to be everything: investment houses, insurance companies, brokerages, global financial supermarkets that offered every possible financial service under one roof. And the institutions that did not grow fast enough, that did not diversify aggressively enough, that remained stubbornly what they had always been, became targets for the institutions that did. In 1983, Irving Trust had 13 branches and was primarily a wholesale bank serving mid-size and large corporations. It was solid, but not spectacular. It was cautious in the same way it had been cautious during the Depression, and caution in the aggressive financial culture of the 1980s looked like weakness. It looked like an invitation. The Bank of New York, one of the oldest financial institutions in the country, headquartered nearby at 48 Wall Street, set its sights on Irving Trust. The takeover began as a hostile bid. Irving Trust's board initially rejected the offer. They said the Bank of New York had undervalued their assets, including One Wall Street itself, which was estimated to be worth $250 million on its own. They fought back. They attempted a defensive maneuver, seeking a friendly merger with Banca Commerciale Italiana, an Italian bank that would have preserved some measure of the Irving identity and kept the institution out of the Bank of New York's hands. The defense failed. On October 7, 1988, the Irving Trust Board signed the merger agreement with the Bank of New York. The transaction was valued at $1,460 million. The fight was over. The name Irving Trust, which had been affixed to the building at One Wall Street since 1931, which had been etched into the cornerstone, which had been whispered in the Red Room and printed on the letterhead and spoken in boardrooms on 6 continents, disappeared. It vanished from the building, from the signage, from the world, 57 years. That is how long the Irving Trust Company occupied the building it had spent $14.5 million to construct. The building it had filled with 3 million tiles and 5,000 tons of vault and a ceiling mosaic celebrating the pursuit of wealth. 57 years, less than a human lifetime. The building had been designed to last forever. The institution that built it did not even last as long as its own architect. The Bank of New York moved in. They modified the cornerstone to include their name. They opened a museum on the 10th floor, dedicated to the history of both banks. A polite gesture that did nothing to change the fundamental fact. Irving Trust was gone, swallowed whole by the forces of deregulation and consolidation that its own cautious culture had left it unable to resist. The building did not mourn. Buildings do not mourn. But if One Wall Street could have looked at the new sign above its door and understood what it meant, it might have felt something like recognition. It had seen this before. The Manhattan Life Insurance Building had stood here and been torn down. The Chimney Building had stood here and been torn down. Now the Irving Trust name had been torn away and the building still stood, waiting patiently for whoever came next. Chapter 8. The room nobody could enter. In 2001, the Red Room was sealed shut, and for the next 2 decades, one of America's most spectacular interiors sat in darkness. The Bank of New York, which would later merge with Mellon Financial Corporation to become BNY Mellon, occupied One Wall Street with the quiet efficiency of an institution that did not need a 3 million tile reception hall to impress its clients. The world had changed. Banking had changed. The relationships that mattered were no longer conducted in marble chambers beneath mosaic ceilings. They were conducted over fiber optic cables, on trading floors, in conference calls that connected offices on 3 continents simultaneously. The Red Room, with its oxblood walls and golden ceiling, was a relic of a banking culture that no longer existed. It was beautiful. It was also useless. So they closed it. The doors were locked. The lights were turned off. And Hildreth Meyer's masterpiece sat in the dark, its 3 million tiles catching nothing, reflecting nothing, its gold leaf invisible in a room that no one entered and no one saw. For 20 years, one of the most extraordinary interior spaces in North America existed only in memory and in photographs. The tiles did not deteriorate. They did not fade. They simply waited in the patient way that stone and glass wait for someone to turn the lights back on. That same year, 2001, the building received its exterior landmark designation from the New York City Landmarks Preservation Commission. The limestone facade was now legally protected. No developer, no owner, no future tenant could alter it without permission. The rippling flutes that Walker had carved into the stone, the setbacks that gave the tower its rhythm against the sky, the crown that caught the afternoon sun and glowed above the financial district, all of it was frozen in place by law. The outside was preserved. The inside was dark. The September 11th attacks that year damaged many buildings in Lower Manhattan, but did not destroy One Wall Street. BNY Mellon's operations were disrupted. The building required cleaning and repair. But the limestone held, as it had held through the Depression, through the war, through every crisis that had tested it. The vault sat 72 feet below the street, undisturbed, guarding whatever remained inside it. In the years that followed, the financial district began a transformation that would have astonished Louis Pearson and Ralph Walker. Lower Manhattan, the neighborhood that had been built entirely for the purpose of making money, started to become a neighborhood where people actually lived. Residential conversions swept through the area like a second kind of demolition. Old office towers, their floor plates too small, and their mechanical systems too outdated for modern financial firms, were gutted and refilled with apartments. Schools opened, grocery stores arrived, parks were landscaped along the waterfront. The population of Lower Manhattan grew steadily. Families moved in. The character of the streets changed. BNY Mellon eventually decided to leave One Wall Street. In 2014, the building was sold to Harry McClough, a developer whose portfolio included some of the most ambitious and controversial projects in recent New York history. McClough's previous landmark was 432 Park Avenue, the ultra-thin concrete tower on Billionaire's Row that had become both a symbol of extreme wealth and a lightning rod for criticism about inequality and the financialization of housing. McClough paid $585 million for One Wall Street. His plan was enormous in scope. He would convert the entire building from commercial offices to residential condominiums. 566 apartments, studios to a triplex penthouse. He partnered with Hamad bin Jassim bin Jaber Al Thani, the former Prime Minister of Qatar, to provide equity financing. Deutsche Bank extended a $750 million mortgage loan. The total projected cost of conversion would eventually be estimated at between $2.3 billion and $2.9 billion. The Red Room would be preserved and reopened. The vault would remain because removing 5,000 tons of iron from 72 feet below the street is not a realistic proposition. The limestone facade would be untouched, but everything behind it, every office partition, every corridor, every elevator, every wire and pipe and duct would be ripped out and replaced. What happens when a building designed to house power is emptied of everything but its shell? It becomes a speculation. It becomes a bet. It becomes a developer's wager that the beauty of a landmarked facade and the legend of a sealed room full of red and gold tiles are worth more than $2 billion. The building waited to see if he was right. Chapter 9. Gutting the Cathedral. In November 2018, the last of 34 elevators was ripped from its shaft, and the interior of One Wall Street ceased to exist. the physical violence of the conversion is difficult to overstate. Think of it as surgery performed on a patient who is nearly 90 years old. Every interior wall was demolished. 34 elevators were removed from their shafts, the cables and counterweights and guide rails pulled out floor by floor. 16 escalators were torn from their tracks. The mechanical systems that had kept the building alive for nearly 9 decades, the boilers and chillers and ductwork and wiring, were stripped out completely and replaced with modern equipment. Workers moved through the tower level by level, reducing each floor to its steel frame and concrete slab, erasing 90 years of occupation in a process that took months and consumed hundreds of millions of dollars. When they were done, the building was a skeleton wearing a landmark skin. The facade stood perfect and untouched, Walker's limestone flutes rippling in the light exactly as they had in 1931. But behind the facade, there was nothing. Empty floors, bare concrete, the bones of a building waiting to be given a new body. 8 stories were added to the annex, expanding the 1960s addition from 28 floors to 36. A glass entrance structure was constructed in front of the annex along Broadway, a modern intervention that ranged between 1 and 7 stories high. And the new glass skin projected forward to meet the facade of Walker's original building, creating a collision of eras that was either a bold architectural dialogue or an uncomfortable marriage. The Red Room received the most careful treatment. During the demolition, workers made a discovery that felt almost providential. Thousands of original tiles, fabricated by Puhl and Wagner in Berlin in 1930, had been sitting in storage in the building's basement for nearly 90 years. Surplus tiles, extras. The kind of cautious overproduction that a careful contractor orders just in case a tile breaks during installation, or a wall needs repair decades later. These tiles had been packed in their original crates, stamped with their original numbers, and stored in the dark since the building opened. They had waded through the Depression, through the war, through the Bank of New York takeover, through 20 years of the Red Room sitting sealed and lightless. And now they were brought back into the light to restore sections of Meyer's mosaic that time had damaged. Consider the journey of those tiles. They were designed by a woman from Queens who had fallen in love with mosaics in Florence. They were fabricated by German craftsmen in Berlin before the rise of the Third Reich. They were shipped across the Atlantic, stored in a basement in Lower Manhattan, and forgotten for 9 decades. They survived everything the 20th century could throw at them. And in 2018, they were finally pressed into the walls they had been made for, completing a restoration that Meyer herself could never have imagined. The total cost of the Red Room restoration was approximately $1 million. The total cost of the entire building conversion reached somewhere between $2.3 billion and $2.9 billion. Consider that number in context. Lewis Pearson and Irving Trust spent approximately $25 million to build one Wall Street in 1929. Harry Macklowe spent roughly 100 times that amount to convert it. Adjusted for nothing but ambition, the conversion cost more than the original construction. 566 apartments were carved from the building's interior. Studios, 1-bedrooms, 2-bedrooms, 3-bedrooms, and at the top of the tower, a triplex penthouse incorporating Walker's White Room, in the original boardroom with its ceiling of iridescent mother-of-pearl Philippine shells. The building was equipped with amenities that would have bewildered its original occupants: a 75-foot swimming pool, a fitness center spanning 4 floors, a co-working space, a private restaurant, a rooftop terrace on the 39th floor with views of the harbor and the Statue of Liberty. Below it all, the vault remained, 5,000 tons, 72 feet down, chemical defenses intact, 6-foot walls unchanged. You cannot move a vault like that. You can only build around it and above it, and hope that the new purpose of the building makes the old purpose irrelevant. Macklowe had gutted a cathedral. The question now was whether anyone wanted to live in one. Chapter 10, 566 doors and almost nobody home. The penthouse was listed at $55 million. By late 2024, only 112 of 566 apartments had sold. The sales launch had begun in 2021 into a market that should have been favorable. New York City real estate was rebounding from the pandemic shock. Interest rates remained historically low. The financial district was attracting residents at a pace that surprised even optimistic projections. The neighborhood's population had grown past 70,000. Macklowe priced the building aggressively, with studios starting at approximately $1,150,000 and the average price per square foot approaching $2,500. The projected total sellout was $1,686 million. The buyers did not come, or rather, not enough of them came. Month after month, the building averaged fewer than 3 contract signings. By the time the New York Post ran a headline calling the project a bust in late 2024, only 112 units had closed. That is roughly 20% of the building. 455 apartments sat empty. The total sales volume of approximately $230 million represented just 14% of the projected sellout, not including the triplex penthouse, which had not yet been formally marketed. Industry analysts identified several converging problems. The prices were too high for the financial district market. The average price per square foot in the neighborhood was around $1,400, barely more than half of what Macklowe was asking. In luxury condominiums in Lower Manhattan, faced an oversupply problem, competing against each other and against newer projects with flashier marketing and lower price tags. And the Asian investment market, which had historically provided a significant share of buyers for high-end New York residential projects, had contracted sharply. Post-pandemic capital controls from China, combined with shifting economic conditions across Asia, had dried up a pipeline of buyers who purchased apartments as investment vehicles rather than primary residences. A majority of the units that had sold were identified through public records as purchases by Asian and Russian buyers, many of them investment properties that were immediately listed for rent rather than occupied. Macklowe replaced his sales team. Compass, which had handled the project since 2021, was let go in May of 2024. 2 former Douglas Elliman brokers were brought on alongside Macklowe Properties' own in-house staff. Prices were reduced, in some cases dramatically. A 28th floor unit that had originally been listed at $5,800,000 was dropped to $3,900,000. Units across the building were discounted an average of nearly 25% from their original asking prices. The building offered everything the contemporary luxury market demanded: 566 units across 50 stories, a 75-foot swimming pool, a 44,000 square foot Whole Foods on the ground floor along Broadway, 175,000 square feet of retail space, a fitness center operated by Lifetime Athletic spanning 74,000 square feet across 4 floors, a 6,500 square foot co-working space, a private restaurant, a rooftop deck, all the amenities of modern luxury living, built atop a vault designed to survive a siege, inside a building designed to project permanence during the worst financial collapse in American history. And still the hallways stayed quiet. Still the doors stayed closed. The red room glowed downstairs, but upstairs, the pursuit of wealth had stalled. The building that had been built to deny impermanence was now struggling to sell the very permanence it promised. The ceiling mosaics, wherever they remained, looked down on empty rooms that no one had bought, and no one had filled with furniture, and no one had called home. Chapter 11. The Silver Bullet and the Forgotten Woman. On January 17, 1973, Ralph Walker melted down the highest honor American architecture had ever given him and used the metal to end his life. Walker was 83 years old. The New York Times had called him the architect of the century in 1957, when the American Institute of Architects created a special award for him, the Centennial Medal of Honor, on the occasion of the organization's 100th anniversary. No architect before or since has received that particular distinction. It was made for him alone. Walker wrote and published an autobiography to commemorate the event. He was at that moment standing at the absolute pinnacle of his profession. The man who had arrived in New York with no degree and no connections, who had earned $1 a week learning to draft, who had designed the Barclay Vesey building and won Wall Street and the Western Union building and a dozen other towers that defined the skyline, had been recognized by his peers as the greatest among them. Then the pinnacle crumbled. In 1960, the AIA accused a member of Walker's firm of acting unprofessionally by taking a contract that belonged to another firm. Walker was personally cleared of any wrongdoing, but the humiliation was total and the wound never healed. He resigned from the AIA, the organization that had created an award specifically for him, the organization whose presidency he had held. The community of architects who had been his professional family for 4 decades. He self-published a booklet defending his reputation and mailed copies to every member of the College of Fellows. The final line of his defense was dignified and devastated. When I sever my connections with the AIA, I do so with my own self-respect, as a matter of pride. He was later cleared and eventually reinstated, but the damage had been done. Something had broken that could not be repaired. Walker and Stella had no children. Their marriage had lasted nearly 50 years. When Stella was committed to a sanatorium in her final years, Walker's world contracted to an emptiness that his buildings could not fill. The towers still stood. The limestone still caught the light. But the man who had designed them for the mental comfort of others could not find comfort for himself. Stella died in July of 1972. Within months, Walker married Christine Folds, a widow from England. The marriage was brief. Before his death, Walker destroyed his AIA award. The Centennial Medal of Honor, the highest distinction American architecture had ever bestowed, was melted down. From the metal, Walker forged a single silver bullet. On January 17, 1973, he placed that bullet in a pistol and shot himself. He was buried in Fairview Cemetery in Ridgefield, Connecticut, near the graves of his parents. A few dozen feet away lies the grave of Cass Gilbert, the architect who designed the Woolworth Building, the very tower where Irving Trust had rented space before Walker built them a monument of their own. Hildreth Meyer died on May 9, 1961, at the age of 68. Her career had spanned 4 decades and encompassed approximately 100 commissions. Her work adorned Radio City Music Hall, St. Bartholomew's Church, Temple Emmanuel, the Nebraska State Capitol, the National Academy of Sciences, and One Wall Street. She had been the first woman appointed to the New York City Art Commission. She had served 4 terms as president of the National Society of Mural Painters. She had received the Fine Arts Medal from the AIA. She had been called a master of murals by the citation that accompanied her award, and after her death, she was almost completely forgotten. Her work remained on the walls. The mosaics at St. Bartholomew's still glowed. The roundels at Radio City Music Hall still caught the eye of everyone who passed them on 50th Street. The Red Room at One Wall Street still shimmered behind its sealed doors. But Mayra's name disappeared from the public conversation. She was overshadowed by the male architects she had collaborated with, by the buildings that received credit for beauty their designers had not created alone, by a historical memory that found it easier to remember structures than the women who decorated them. It took more than 4 decades and the dedicated effort of her great-granddaughter to begin the work of restoration. The International Hildreth Mayra Association was founded in 2004 to preserve and publicize her legacy. A book was published in 2014. Exhibitions were organized. Slowly, the name was reconnected to the work. But for 40 years, millions of people had walked past Mayra's mosaics and admired them and never known who had made them. The walls remembered. The world did not. Lewis Pearson, the chairman who had dreamed of owning the corner of Wall and Broadway, died quietly in 1954. He does not appear in any headline today. His building has outlived him by more than 70 years and counting. The building remembers none of them. It stands at the corner and catches the light and does not care who built it or who decorated it or who signed the checks. It has outlived them all, and it will outlive us too. Chapter 12. What the Vault Knows. The vault is still down there, 72 feet below the street, 5,000 tons of iron and steel and concrete guarding absolutely nothing. Above it, the Red Room has been reborn. On March 21st, by 2025, the French luxury retailer Printemps opened its first American location inside the space that Hildreth Mayra had designed as a persuasion chamber for frightened millionaires. The oxblood tiles and gold leaf mosaics, restored with surplus tiles that had waited 90 years in a basement, now frame white flower-shaped lamps and soft textiles and designer shoes displayed on pedestals shaped like leaves. A cocktail bar called the Red Room Bar serves mezcal drinks and shrimp cocktail in the warm glow of a space that was built to convince wealthy depositors that their money was safe. Where bankers once reassured clients that the vault was deep enough and the walls were thick enough, shoppers now browse cashmere and photograph the ceiling with their phones. The irony is so dense you could tile a wall with it. But irony is the easy reading. What is harder and more honest is understanding what One Wall Street actually reveals about the way Americans build, and the reasons they build, and the things they are willing to destroy in order to keep building. The building received its interior landmark designation for the Red Room in June of 2024, 93 years after it opened. The lobby ceiling mosaics, Mayra's pursuit of wealth, were removed at some point during the decades of occupation and conversion. Their current whereabouts and condition remain uncertain. The pursuit of wealth continues. The artistic record of it does not. Consider the lives that passed through this building and were consumed by it. Lewis Pearson, the chairman who wanted to own the most expensive dirt in America, us who spent $14.5 million on land and another $25 million on a monument to his institution's permanence, dead in 1954 and forgotten by everyone who did not read this script. Ralph Walker, the architect of the century, the man who made 50 stories of limestone feel like fabric draped over bone, who dressed as his own building at a costume ball, who melted his greatest honor into the instrument of his own destruction, and was buried a few feet from another architect who had also built towers that other men would eventually tear down. Hildreth Meyer, the master of murals, who covered 7,000 square feet of wall in 3 million tiles, and was then erased from public memory for 40 years, while those tiles sat in sealed darkness behind locked doors. The Irving Trust Company, the institution that built One Wall Street to last forever, and was swallowed whole by a hostile takeover after 57 years. Every one of them built for permanence. Every one of them was temporary. And the building stands. The limestone catches the light at angles that change with the seasons. The crown glows above the financial district in the late afternoon. The facade ripples, exactly as Walker intended, like fabric draped over the skeleton of a city that cannot stop building and cannot stop tearing down what it has built. The vault was designed to outlast catastrophe. It did. The walls are 6 feet thick. The chemical defenses remain embedded in the steel. The 5,000 tons of iron and concrete have not shifted in nearly a century. The vault has survived the Great Depression, the Second World War, the Cold War, and the attacks of September 11th, the financial crisis of 2008, and a $2 billion renovation that gutted every floor above it and replaced every wall and every wire. The vault endures. It is the most permanent thing in the building. It is also the most useless. The money left. The bank died. The architect destroyed himself with a bullet forged from his own metal. The artist was forgotten for 4 decades, while her masterpiece gathered dust in the dark. The building was hollowed out and refilled with apartments that mostly sit empty. And the Red Room, the persuasion chamber, the glittering lie that told wealthy depositors their fortunes were safe, now sells French perfume and designer sneakers to tourists who admire the tiles without knowing who placed them or why. See, what One Wall Street reveals is the central paradox of American wealth. The projection of permanence is itself the most temporary thing of all. We build monuments to convince ourselves and others that what we have will last. We quarry limestone from Indiana. We import marble from the Pyrenees. We fabricate tiles in Berlin. We dig vaults 72 feet into the bedrock and lace them with chemicals and surround them with 6 feet of steel. We station 200 men with machine guns in the streets to guard the money as it moves. And none of it holds. Not the money, not the names, not the institutions, not the identities, not even the purpose of the building itself. The forms change. The address remains. One Wall Street is no longer a bank. It is no longer the headquarters of an institution that believed the sun would never set on its empire. It is an apartment building where hundreds of empty units wait for buyers who have not yet arrived. It is a French department store where shoppers browse luxury goods in a room built to disguise panic. It is a fitness center and a grocery store and a co-working space and a swimming pool, all of it layered above a vault that guards nothing, and below a crown that catches the same light it caught in 1931, when 4,000 construction workers finished the last of 50 stories, while 4 million Americans searched for any work at all. The pursuit of wealth continues. Walk down Broadway past the glass entrance. Step inside Printemps and look up at the Red Room ceiling. See the tiles shift from red to orange to gold. It's exactly as Myra intended, exactly as they appeared to the frightened depositors who sat here during the worst years of the Depression, believing, because the room told them to believe, that everything was going to be fine. The room is still telling that story. The story has always been a lie, and the lie is still the most beautiful thing on Wall Street.